Right, good morning and welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council website after the meeting. We have received apologies from Mr. Bill and Mr. Grimes. Mr. Grimes has been quite unwell and has been in the intensive care unit at Glenfield Hospital, so we wish him well. He's hoping to be home this weekend, but we would wish him well, and I'll send him a note. So on to the agenda. The minutes. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of December 24 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? That's agreed. Thank you. Question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Questions asked by members under Standing Orders 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions. Item 4, there are no urgent items. Number 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do members have any declarations they want to declare?
I always make my usual one as the lawyers make pensioner.
Thank you, Terry. Presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35. No petitions have been received. On to item 7, the quarterly Treasury Management Report. Nick Walsh, Head of Service Finance, will introduce this item. Nick, so over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report, which starts on page 11 of your pack, summarises the position as at the end of quarter 3 of the 24-25 financial year. Paragraphs 2 to 7 are the usual reminder of the policy framework for Treasury management, what it is and what the committee's responsibilities are. Starting at paragraph 8, the key points that arise from Link's economics summary, which is attached to Annex A, are covered. And during the quarter, CPI inflation is increased to 2.6% in November. It actually was expected to rise further in the following months, but the December figures showed it had reduced slightly to 2.5%. And GDP, it contracted by 0.1% in October, following a flat lining in September, and then it grew again by 0.1% in November. So basically flat over the whole quarter. And it was below market expectations, which suggests that the economy has a bit less momentum in it than most economics had previously expected. Paragraphs 12 to 16 summarise the position with respect to the Council's private debt and bank risk shareholdings. In respect to the 2017 Partners MAC4 fund, a further £0.9 million of capital had been returned to us, leaving 1.8 million still invested. And we also received 1 million in relation to the MAC6 fund, 0.8 million of which was invested capital and 0.2 million of which was income. So 12.6 million remains invested in that fund. And then for the Christopherson Robb Fund, the original 15 million of capital still all remains invested, but a further 2.6 million of income was received. There's been no movements on the MAC7 fund. Moving on to short-term investments, the table, paragraph 17, shows that the balance reduced over the quarter from £443 million to £373 million. During the period, 148 million of loans matured, average rate of 5.3%, and 78 million of new loans were placed at an average APR of 4.64%. The weighted average maturity has reduced from 150 days to 139 days, kind of reflecting really a tendency to invest for shorter periods as interest rates have begun to decline. The table in paragraph 21 breaks down the investments at the end of the period by different institutions, and the charts in paragraph 22 provide additional information on how the investments are split geographically and also the credit rating. Moving on to the section starting at paragraph 24 and the accompanying chart, you can see there that the weighted APR on the investment portfolio has decreased from 5.41% at the end of quarter 2 to 5.31% at the end of quarter 3, which just reflects the reductions in the rates available for short-term investments as the Bank of England's rate has fallen. It's therefore likely to continue to reduce as the market anticipates further reductions in base rates. Albeit now the reductions are expected to be over a longer time frame than was expected previously. What you can see from the chart is that as rates have stabilised and begun to reduce, the APR is consistently above base rate, which was much more difficult to achieve on the left-hand side of the graph as rates were increasing significantly. Section moving on debt rescheduling, that shows that opportunities have been taken during this last quarter to repay some further long-term debt. 2 chunks of repayment have been undertaken, and in total over the period, we paid nearly £20 million of debt off. The first chunk was debt at an average interest rate of 5.49%, which incurred a 1.072 million net premium. The second chunk, which was at an average rate of 8%, had a premium cost of 3.317 million. The reason these opportunities arose was the driving up of the price of gilts or government borrowing in the run-up to and over the Christmas period, which made loan repayment attractive. So subject to what was affordable based on our cash flow, we took a view to repay more debts. Now, even with repaying these loans, it's unlikely that any new borrowing will need to be undertaken during the MTFS period, meaning that when it is required further down the line, it should be possible to do so at significantly lower rates. The loans that were targeted were those offering the best discount rate based on advice from Link, our Treasury Management advisors. Whilst premiums were incurred on this loan, the repayment showed positive net present values based on an estimate of what is going to happen with respect to long-term interest rates, essentially that they will fall back to 3.5% in the longer term. And then you can see from the graph on paragraph 31 that by repaying these loans, we'll save about 1.25 million of interest per year. That compares roughly with about 850,000 a year that would be foregone as interest on our investment balances. So it's difficult to be precise, but we estimate a net saving of around 400,000 a year will be achieved in interest on the back of that. Moving on to the section starting paragraph 32, notable events since. This is just to draw the committee's attention to the fact that as the cost of borrowing continued to reach new highs in early January, we actually undertook a further £9.7 million of repayment as well then. Again, premiums were required in order to repay these loans, but if you take that into account, the effective saving from doing so is a 5.6% on the balance compared to the long-term 3.5% base rate forecasts. Obviously, this falls in the next period to this report, so we'll bring more details on that next time. Paragraph 35 confirms that the Council has continued to operate within its Treasury and prudential indicators. And just finally, paragraph 36 shows that current forecast for investment income over the course of this year is 19.6 million now to the 14.2 million budget. That's all I was going to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Has anybody got any questions or queries on the report? Okay, so we are asked to note the report on I'm happy to move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder?
Second, Mr. Chair.
All those in favour? Thank you. So on to item 8, Treasury Management Strategy Statement. Again, Nick, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this report, which begins on page 29 of your pack, presents the updated Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 2025-26, which forms part of the overall MTFS. The statement itself is attached as an appendix to this report and includes policy around minimum revenue prudential indicators and various other sort of components that sort of set the framework for Treasury management. The statement will be considered by full council as part of the full MTFS at the meeting on the 19th of February. There is an awful lot of detail included in the statement itself, so I'm not going to go through that in a lot of detail. But just to summarise, it begins on page 35 of the pack. Initially, it highlights the framework which provides the context around which the strategy is based, requirements involved in taking Treasury management decisions and the responsibility of those involved. Starting at paragraph 11 of the appendix is the background to the current economic climate, which essentially I've just covered in the previous report. Treasury management strategy, starting at the bottom of page 39, page 40 really, that sets out the key considerations when taking Treasury management decisions, reporting, training requirements, details of the Council's Treasury management advisors and consultants, current assessment of the Council's capital financing requirement, minimum revenue provision, prudential and Treasury indicators, and the approach to any borrowing that may need to be undertaken. And the annual investment strategy, which starts on page 48, sets out the investment policy, management of risk, the creditworthiness policy, limits with counterparties and countries, details of pool property and infrastructure fund investments, environmental, social, governance considerations, scheme of delegation, and the role of the Section 151 officer. There are some specific annexes to the statement which cover the minimum revenue provision statement, that's Annex 1. Annex 2 is the prudential and Treasury indicators used to assess the Treasury management activity over the year. Annex 3 is the policy on approved organisations for lending. And Appendix 4 is the Treasury management statement. The key thing to probably note is that the majority of the strategy is unchanged from last year, with numbers obviously updated as appropriate to cover the latest position. There are just two changes that I did want to draw your attention to. The first one relates to some of the upper investment limits for counterparties. Paragraph 15 of the report, page 31 of your pack, relates to this. So we're seeking to increase the limits of each of our 4 money market funds from 40 million to 50 million each. And also we're looking to increase the limit for investments in banks from any specific country from 50 million to 70 million. And these changes are kind of minimal risk, and really just to ensure that when we need to, we've got sufficient counterparty capacity to make sure that we can manage our funds accordingly when cash balances are high and avoid having to leave funds in our bank account earning low or no interest, for example. And then the second change is linked to the minimum revenue provision, or MRP as it's referred to. So this is covered in the section starting at paragraph 17 of the main report, page 32 of the pack. MRP is the amount that needs to be charged to the revenue account each year to fund the financing of capital expenditure. And during the current financial year, we've reassessed our current policy. And as a result, have identified a change that can be made. The change involves moving away from the current straight line basis to an annuity basis, which takes into account the time value of money and better matches the charge to the useful life of the assets. It's felt to be fairer on council taxpayers, and it creates a consistent charge each year in real terms, rather than charges being more front-loaded as they are if you use a straight line method. The graphs in paragraph 22 show the impact and change of, and paragraph 23 summarises that instead of a flat line charge of £6 million per annum, the charge increases from 4.1 million next year to 8.1 million in year 35 using the annuity basis. It should be said that our external auditors, Grant Thornton, are currently reviewing this proposed change. And obviously, if any issues are raised by them, we will revert back to the existing method. I think that was probably all I was going to say, Chair. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nick, for that run through. Mr. Bolton.
Yeah, go right to the beginning of the report again. Councils have a difficult financial situation, every council. And one of the ways doing that is some councils bought property, bringing investment in and revenue investment in. This council being one of them, we bought the Citroen garage, I believe, and we also bought some property in Lichfield, I believe, which was to bring money in. But according to what we just read here, we can't do that anymore. The government says that we can't use that money to bring investment in. Is that correct?
I think, Mr. Potter, we can, but we can't do it anymore. So those that are existing, we can still keep
those. We're not
them.
going to dispose of them.
It probably offsets against the, I'm not quite sure, but I think they offset it. They look to see whether it's viable, and also it affects our ability to borrow from the Public Works Loan Board. I'm not sure. I'll let the expert professionals
as
deal.
we've done this, especially the Citroen garage is going because down the road, but Lichfield seems a little way off. And is it fully let? Is it bringing the income in, or how much is let?
Nick, over to you, please.
So, in answer to the first point, what you've articulated there, Chair, is correct. The regulations result to any further new investments, but those the investments that we've already got, we're okay with. And the impact is, as you say, that you may not be able to borrow from the Public Works Loan Board if you need it, if you're judged to have made further investments that were for income benefit rather than for wider economic benefit. So that's correct. In terms of the income in Lichfield House, I don't know the details of how much of that has been let, etc. But I guess that's something we can find out the details. I don't know if you know what the detail is, but Simone. But
No.
I think at the moment that investment is achieving income in line with the original appraisal, and certainly whilst we have had a void recently, we've actually been able to re-let that reasonably quickly. So I think that's kind of confidence that the investment itself is still quite attractive to the market. But as Nick said, we can follow that up with some more specific details on the actual performance of that asset.
Okay, so we'll let you know.
I think, yes, it's just that, councils looking at other ways to raise revenue. This is one that's been cut off again. So, each time we look at something, it seems to be abandoned after a few years, and our opportunity to raise money is getting less and less each year.
I wouldn't disagree. I think the government was concerned that there was going to be some councils are overzealous and possibly not appraising it so well, and they were getting into difficulty, and that's what they were trying to avoid. In the main, that's but luckily it certainly sounds though we haven't gone overboard, but some councils have gone completely overboard, buying shopping malls and all sorts, which are really difficult. But thanks, Mr. Bolter. Have we got any other questions, Terry?
Just on that point, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I'll take the point, but my understanding is still that where there is an overriding economic interest for the county, we can still consider doing it, such as empty plots which no one else might develop, and in fact there is one council in the last couple of years that have bought a shopping centre, and that was approved because of the economic well-being of the area had the shopping centre closed down. So I don't think it's as black as white. I think it's right that there is an overriding economic interest rather than just a profit interest, but I think you can have the two go hand in glove. My question really is probably regarding the best place is page 62. I think our officers here do a superb job in identifying counterparties where we place funds. I would just like to see a comment in there to reassure our residents that our officers will do everything in our power to ensure that even if the rating level of a bank is sufficient, we would not always invest with it if we felt that there were reputational risks to this council doing so. I can certainly think of parts of the world where the bank's ratings are superb, but we wouldn't invest money. And I just would like to see that reflected in there by some sort of short statement about, the bank would always consider the reputational risk of this council and try as far as is practicable to follow an ethical investment policy. I appreciate it's subjective what ethical investments are, but I think we can only do our best. But I know we do it. I would just like to see it reflected in the comments to tell the public we do it. And I think we could find some simple form of wording just to provide that reassurance without going too far.
Would that be possible, Nick? Something wording. I understand what Mr. Richardson is trying to say. I suppose realistically, it's investing in countries where there are significant problems, human rights, and issues like that. Would it be possible to come up with a formal wording for the future to cover that?
I think as long as it doesn't make the caveats that you've talked about, Mr. Richardson, about, to the best endeavours, etc. I mean, we could, in theory, add it in to this, couldn't we? I think, and then this goes on to full council for a final approval as part of the MTFS. So,
if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I just think I just would like to reflect what our officers are actually doing. They're really doing their best to ensure that we only invest in, and I just think it's quite nice sometimes to actually let the public know that our officers are doing their absolute utmost to ensure that where we do invest funds is the best possible place from both a return basis, but we're not always just chasing the return. We're also considering what could be reputational damage to this council should we do something daft, which I don't believe we would ever do, but I think it gives reassurance to the public. So I think if it is possible, I accept it might not be possible, and if it's not, I'm happy for it not to be there, but I just think we could find a very short paragraph that would reflect it.
So, if we could have it just a one-liner, it is difficult, but even along the lines of something, all issues relating to an investment are considered, including it's got to be fairly clear, not clearly, carefully worded, I think. Yeah.
And I think that's right. I think we just need to think carefully through what we wanted to put in the policy so that it didn't cause us any issues with flexibility. But we can think about some appropriate wording and perhaps again circulate that through the chair to make sure you're comfortable with it.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Is everybody happy with that? Is all committee happy with that? Yeah. Okay. So have we got any other questions or queries? No. So we are asked. We're asked to recommend that the county council approves the treasury management strategy, which is attached to the report. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour? That's that. Thank you. So we're on to item 9, external audit of the 23-24 statement of accounts, annual government statement and pension fund accounts. Simone Hines, Assistant Director of Corporate Resources, will introduce this item. We're also joined by Helen Lillington and Timothy Lacey from Grant Thornton, the Council's external auditors. So welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us. So over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Chair. I will just introduce this item briefly and then hand over to Helen. And I also understand you have had the training this morning as well. So I know you've probably got lots of details in your head from this report. So this report is the 23-24 financial statements and also the letter of representations and presents those to the committee. You've also got the key findings from the external auditor, and that's at Appendix B. Unfortunately, there are some audit queries still outstanding. I do understand those are minor, but again, I'm sure Helen will clarify that in a moment. But it does mean that we are not going to be in a position to sign off the account today, which we originally expected to be able to do. For that reason, we are proposing through the chair that we make a minor change to the recommendation to give delegated authority to the Director of Corporate Resources and Chair of the Committee to approve and sign the accounts once those final queries have been resolved. I understand those final queries relate largely to valuation queries and are minor, and that also means those queries shouldn't impact on the financial position set out in the accounts to any great extent, and they won't impact on the general fund balance, which is what is of most concern to us and the committee. So section 13 of the report just briefly sort of outlines the key areas of the statement. So I appreciate they are very long, complex documents. So we've tried to just pick out some of the key information in those accounts that the committee may be particularly interested in, such as what reserve balances are at year end and some of the key balance sheet figures in the accounts. You've then got from section 35 onwards, you have got a summary of the audit findings report, and then as I said, attached to Appendix B, you've got the detail of that. That audit findings report does identify a number of, again, relatively small adjustments to the accounts and some improvement recommendations that have arisen from the audit. But the number of those compared to the length and complexity of the accounts, I do think is a significant achievement, and I'm sort of really pleased that the team have got us to this position. But at that point, I will hand over to Helen to go through the rest of the report and the audit findings report, but obviously happy to take questions after that as well.
Okay, so Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. And yes, I think I probably just want to echo Simone's comments to start off with. This has been a really good audit, and I'd just like to take a moment just to reflect back in terms on the journey that you've been on, but where the rest of the sector actually is as well. If you think about the sort of timeliness of the signing of the prior year accounts, so talking 22-23, I have to get my years right. If you think about when that was signed and then almost to come straight in almost seemingly to 23-24, and we are again significantly earlier than it has been. So there is that trajectory of continuing to move forward, which I think is really positive. This is a good audit report. As Simone said, we've identified there are 2 adjustments that have been made, and those are purely sort of classification issues. We've got 2 unadjusted errors again, which are not material. One in relation to again a classification, which, as I've said, is not material. The other relates to findings on the pension fund, which I'm sure you're aware you have a share of that, and therefore the share of that we need to reflect through. But again, a long way below our levels of materiality. So reflecting back on where you've ended up, it's a really good news story. I'd also remind you that I was here at the last committee and we talked through the value for money work. And again, while we discussed a number of improvement recommendations, again, there were no significant weaknesses around that area. So in terms of the overall opinion I will give, planning to be that it won't be modified and there won't be any reference to any significant weaknesses in terms of the value for money. So I think that's really important and a really strong position to be in. As Simone said, there are a few minor points that we just need to tidy up so I can be in a position to sign the opinion. And you'll appreciate that there's the whole timing difference in terms of how we complete the work, needing to write our report, needing to get it for papers. So it is always written at a point in time. So I'd just like to take you through where we are on sort of, it's your page 214, it's our page 4. So there are a list of things on there that we said at the time are outstanding. So just to run you through those quite briefly so you understand where we're sat. The work with the valuer, as you know, our PPE is a real area of focus for us and all auditors. I know last year that was really challenging. This year you have worked with a new valuer, and I think it's probably fair to reflect that was off to a slightly slower start, but it picked up real pace, and we've seen some real improvement this year in terms of how we've worked with your new valuer. The collaboration has been really good. There are just a couple of tiny things that we need to get the final piece of evidence on so that we can complete that. But it is a significant improvement on where you were in prior years. And we would hope that now we've started to build that relationship going forward, that would continue to be easier. We talk about level 3 investments disclosures. So this was an area where we identified sort of misclassification between the different levels of investment. You'll be aware that they could classify your investments as level 1, level 2, level 3, depending on how complicated they are. we identified one that we felt should be in a level 3 categorisation, which we discussed with officers. That has now moved in your draft in the accounts that you have in front of you, but that has also resulted in what we call a prior period adjustment, and again that is reflected in the statements that you have. What I would say is that we are just in discussion with officers again for some slight tweaks, and this is purely around the disclosures. This is not having any impact in terms of the numbers. It is just around clarifying some of those disclosures. So again, that refers back to what Simone was saying, just in terms of just some delegated authority just to finalise those last few points. We talked about review of evidence for creditors. We received that yesterday. It is a handful out of quite a large sample. We just need to work through that. So I would be hopeful that we would complete that by the end of next week. In terms of the investment confirmations, that is now complete. You have a management letter of representation in your packs, which is agreed. We'll obviously require receipt of that actually on the day we sign, but it's for you to approve today. And importantly to note around that, we are not asking for any specific or any unusual representations. It is a very standard letter of representation, so part of our normal course of events. And then we have reviewed the final set of statements that you have in front of you, but we'll just need to go back with those last few tweaks that are made to make sure those have gone through. And then we complete our final reviews to enable me to sign. So we've made a fair bit of progress since we wrote the report. Still a little way to go, but nothing that I consider is going to cause a significant problem. Nothing that we're anticipating would change, as Simone said, the bottom line, which I think is quite important. In terms of our significant risks, I'm not proposing to go through those with you. There'll be ones you're familiar with. The key one is, but we've talked around in terms of the property, plant and equipment, and that work is nearly complete. Pensions you will be familiar with again, and I've talked about that unadjusted error, and I've talked you through those sort of financial instrument type disclosures. So it's a long report. I'm sure you've all read it. I think probably from me that's the highlight, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Helen. Overall, it sounds positive. We're nearly in a position to be able to sign them off. Has any member got a question? Neil, welcome to you, Terry.
Yes, and thank you very much for the report and the presentation. My question is just in relation to the point that you've highlighted regarding those, as you described, minor elements concerning the delay that's been caused. Can you give the committee an assurance that the sign-off will be ready before the backstop date on the 20th of February?
Yes, absolutely.
Bill.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, good report. I've enjoyed reading it. However, there is one technical error, which is very small. Very small. In the report on page 148, you put Her Majesty. It should be His Majesty. Right?
I can apologise.
Just to prove I've read the report, every word of it. Okay. Also, I know it's an old subject, Furze Farm and the clean-up operation. I'm surprised there was no insurance claim we could do for that, but perhaps Mr. Jones will answer that one. Was a lot of money clearing it up, and has the farm now been let in entirety, or is some of it still not able to be let? That one. Yes, page 201. Somewhere, I can't find it at the minute, somewhere in there it says that the Environment and Transport Department, it has not spent £19,000. It's I think somewhere in here that gone back to reserves. they're always telling me they've got no money, they can't do anything. So in that case, why have they not spent all the budget they've been given?
Yeah,
Good questions.
I recall reading that myself, but I presume if they haven't spent it, they can't just take it for themselves. They've got to put it somewhere, and it goes back into reserves. But Simone, the farm, and I was going back some years now. I think there was an issue with that. But maybe Neil, you could answer that.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Bolton. Yeah. So what we've done here is purely to close off the initial governance issue around when that was identified. I'm afraid I'll have to come back to you as regarding the letting of the farm. Since then, I've not, once I'd signed it off, I've not actually considered whether it's been re-let in its entirety. So can we come back to Mr. Bolter on that one? Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely fine, Neil. As long as we let Mr. Bolton know that, we're fine. Simone, as far as this money that went back to reserve because it wasn't utilised, I understand it was a highways fund. I don't know what really to say about that.
There's various reasons for sort of needing to contribute to reserves at year end. It may have been, for instance, that it was a ring fenced grant that we'd made commitments to spend, but in the next financial year, so we'd put the money in reserves then to use the next financial year. So it may just have been a timing difference in terms of when the spend was committed and when we need to spend it, or it could have been sort of grant funding that we also needed to put in reserve. So there will be a variety of reasons why we've added to reserves or had reserve movements during the year.
So I thought, Chair, if it had been allocated to the committee, it'd been rolled over to the next year, not taken back into the general reserves, because once it's gone into general reserves, they've lost that money to use the next year.
Simone, would you have a comment to make on that?
Well,
if it was a specific earmark reserve,
it would have gone into earmark reserves rather than
Yeah.
the general fund balance. Yeah, so it just it depends on the type of reserve and the type of spend that it was being needed for the following year.
Yeah. Okay, right. Has anybody got any other questions? Terry?
Thank you, Chair. Just before I ask the question, could Simone alluded to it at the start of her presentation, could we minute our thanks to Nick and Jason for the excellent presentation they gave us this morning, which I think did assist this committee greatly. And I know it wasn't done in public, but I just would like to minute our thanks to them and look forward, as they've indicated they can do, to giving us such briefings going forward, which I think we would find extremely useful. On the substantive point, myself and the chair, so I'm vice chairman of the committee, had our briefing yesterday, and we were given no warning that there might be a delay in the ability to sign the accounts off. So I suppose my question is, if this report was prepared a couple of weeks ago and we knew these items were on there, why were we not able to clear them up, and why did we get such late notification that therefore we wouldn't be able to sign off the accounts today? So as a council, I think I always find it very important that we can do as much in public as possible, rather than delegate to, no defence to the chairman, to delegate to the chairman and one of our senior officers where possible. So I'm just wondering, why would the vast sums of money we pay to auditors, could we not have cleared these up before this date? Bear in mind, we knew what the date was that we had to achieve.
Over to you, Hannah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, happy to take that. And it is a big, complicated audit with lots of moving parts. I think it's a huge achievement to get as far as we have got by the day. I think there are, as I say, it is a handful of points that are outstanding, some of which we got back just yesterday. And there are still 2 points that we have yet to have from the external valuer. So everybody has been working incredibly hard towards that date. I think the fact that I can sit here and say we are confident that that is not going to cause a significant problem and we can clear within the next week, I think is a significant way forward. But I do appreciate your frustration in terms of it would have been, we were working very hard to get it to this point. We have made significant steps forward. We're just not quite at a point where I'm in a position to put pen to paper.
Yep. Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I was just puzzled at you must have known this before today. So at what point did you know that you wouldn't get the stuff back from the value? At what point were you waiting for information for us as a council? So was the delay at our end? Because if these are such minor points, I would have thought that it should have been possible to actually, say to people, look, can we have this by A, B, and Z, X, Y, and Z date, and then we can sign it off. It just strikes me as strange that we hold up the whole of, as you say, an extremely long and complicated report for some minor items, which if they're that minor and uncomplicated in my world, and I've worked for an international bank for 42 years, we would have just signed off as minor and not raised it, because if they're that minor, they're not worth actually raising, and they shouldn't defeat anything.
Yeah, and if I may, I can completely appreciate that point. I mean, we have been working, we've been in daily contact with officers. Officers have escalated at every available opportunity to get these things through. I think we were out on site just this week to try and get those last few bits cleared. And I say they're minor and they're a handful of items, but those handful of items then complete our sample testing in terms of creditors. So would give us that overall picture. From what we've seen, we are anticipating that will not cause us any problems, but I still need to get to that point where I have that full assurance that everything has been signed down. Similarly, with the queries that we're waiting from the valuer, it is confirmation of building rates, which we've been asking for a number of times. We keep getting spreadsheets back that don't have the attachment on them. So again, we're confident they're there. We actually just need to see them. So that's why I'm sat here saying we've had those conversations. We've been having those conversations this week. We are still working, we are working hard. We appreciate that frustration. The communication, it has been there in terms of where we're at. So I'd leave it at that.
Okay, thank you for those points, Mr. Richardson. Has anybody else got any other questions or queries on the accounts? No? All right. So bearing in mind what we've discussed, the committee is recommended to grant delegated authority to the Director of Corporate Resources and the Chair of the committee to approve and sign the financial statements and letters of representation for 23-24 once each final item has been cleared up, and hopefully by the 28th of February they will be cleared up and we will be able to do that. And if there's any problems, we'll report back. Bill? Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay, if we can, once that's been signed off, we'll let you know. We'll let the whole committee know, certainly. So I'm happy to recommend that. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. So the next item is item 10, the risk management update. This report is presented by Neil Jones, Head of Internal Audit. But first we have a presentation on cybersecurity. So Matt Reynolds, Head of Architecture and Compliance, has joined us to provide this presentation. So welcome, Matt, and over to you for your presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
So just before I get started, one point I want to make is that in the cybersecurity situation, knowledge is very critical, and who has that knowledge is very critical. So this report I've kept quite high level in terms of a technical, which might be a blessing in some ways. But if there's any acronyms or any technical elements that you're not sure about, please just ask a question. I'll obviously talk through that with no problem at all. That's the first point. Second point, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to go through the cybersecurity stuff. I know it can be seen as quite a dry topic to go through, but it is very important to this organisation, and to get your time to talk it through is very much appreciated. So thank you for that. Right, on to the first slide. So cybersecurity, it's not an imaginary issue. It's not an imaginary risk. There's some examples up on the screen there of local authorities that have been attacked and suffered from a cyber security breach. You can see stretching over the last few years, Copeland got hit by a malware attack, lost access to all their systems, completely paralysed their operations. Redcar and Cleveland, a few years after that, again, another ransomware attack. 95% of their data was encrypted. That means that people can't access it. The systems lock up. And it took 4 weeks to just restore 2/3 of their systems. And the financial impact of that is 10.4 million, 10% of their budget. So not insignificant by any stretch. And then more recently and closer to home, Leicester City Council recently were also hit. The full impact of that, we're not entirely sure. We have had quite a lot of communications with them and taken some of their learnings. They had a lot of infrastructure changes off the back of the attack. They had to do that in a very expedient manner, so you can imagine it caused a lot of disruption to the council. So this risk is very much a real one, and one that we need to take seriously. So how do we ensure that we're in the best position to face this threat? So we base our approach on the NIST National Institute of Standards and Technology framework. So it covers 5 main areas that we focus on. So identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So that all sounds very good, but what does it actually mean? So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on those various different areas. So the first one is identify. So identify is about understanding the environment that you're dealing with. So what technical equipment do we have? What policies do we have in place? And what services do we provide? So you can't really defend against something if you don't know it's there to protect. So this is done through strong governance. We have very good asset management to understand what technical elements we have at play. Risk management, so any new systems that are put in place, we do a full risk assessment against them and ensure that we've got the cyber element addressed by that. We've got change management process, so even when these systems are put into place, any changes that happen to them are fully documented, and again the cyber risk element is brought into play. We also look at what we've got coming up down the line using our cybersecurity roadmap. So that maps out our strategy for the next year to 18 months. Alongside this, we also go for our public service network PSN accreditation every year. So this requires a third party to come in and basically scan portions of our systems to make sure that they meet cybersecurity requirements, that we haven't got any threats, any blank spots that we need to cover off. And we also use our internal audit and external audit teams to keep us on our toes and check our systems and make sure that they're in the right place. Now, with all these checks and balances and the complexities of our systems, it does bring up quite a number of vulnerabilities. IT systems are very complicated and they change at a rapid pace. So an immense amount of effort from IT and from the departments goes into ensuring that our systems are in the best possible position that they can be. So once we understand our environment, the next element, and this is probably the area that people most think about when we talk about cybersecurity, is the protect area. So this is where a lot of our technical elements come into play. So we look at client defense. So that's how do we protect the laptops and the desktop PCs. We use anti-malware software, password protection. We use third-party products to ensure that the systems are controlled and understood. But also, and just as important, is the training and awareness that we give out to our staff, and ensuring that they understand what the threat of cybersecurity is, what their part is to play in that. And I'd say that is as important, if not more important, than the technical controls that we put in place. And obviously, we also cover off our network. We have firewalls. We have encrypted information that goes across the network as well. And then perimeter defenses. So we have ensuring that any information that flows in or out of the authority is analysed and ensures that it's not an attack that's taking place. So, like I say, the protect element is very important. It requires constant assessment of the threats and the services that we deliver. And it's probably the area that, like I say, people most think about when we talk about cybersecurity. Next up is detect, because to be honest, even the most stringent defense mechanism won't keep out. That there will always be some sort of chink in our armor that we need to be aware of, and it's very important we accept that, because we can't just put all those protect elements in place and sit back and say the job's done, we haven't got anything to worry about. So the detect element is all about continually monitoring our network and our systems to see if there's any behavior happening on there that we wouldn't expect and that could be signs of an attack that's happening. The Leicester City attack, for example, the attackers were actually on their network for a number of months, looking at what was going on in there and working out where the areas were that they were going to go and actually extract the data from. Because once they go into active mode, it's much easier to see them, and so they want to make sure they're getting the best, the most valuable targets out of that. So the detect element is very, very important. We've recently put a new system in, something called a SIEM, which is a security information and event management system. It's kind of like our cyber radar. So it looks at all the activity that goes on within our systems and our network, and constantly reports back to us on any behavior that looks abnormal. Now, it generates quite literally millions of records a day because of all the activity. So we also rely on a third party to help sift out some of those records and just focuses on the areas that look like they're high risk. We do sometimes get alerts that are false positives, but again, you know, it keeps us on our toes, and it's more important that we get as much information as we possibly can. So that's the detect element. Next up, and one of the areas that I just want to make you aware of, and you've probably seen this button actually, detect. So email is a very prominent channel for introducing malware, etc., into our network, and also getting the trust of people. So fake emails, I think everybody's seen those sort of things, pretending to be people that they're not. On the email system, there's a little button up there called report phishing. If you get any emails that you think may not be genuine, please click that button when you open it up, and that will go through to the IT department, and they'll look at that email. They'll talk to our security advisors and just see whether it's a risk or not, because in all likelihood, you're not the only one who's been targeted with that email, and we'll be able to put an alert out or block the sender that's sending those out. So that email phishing button is very, very important to us, and again, an example of how staff can help us protect our systems. Right, respond. Okay, so once we are aware of an attack happening, we need to be able to respond to it quickly and professionally, so we're not running around like headless chickens wondering what we should be doing about the situation. So we have a cyber incident plan, which gives us a structured approach, make sure we don't miss any items that we need to cover off. It also covers off any key details and contacts that we need to speak to, so both internally and externally. So we deal with the NCSC, which is the National Cybersecurity Centre, the Police Cyber Crimes Department, and our own cyber incident response partner. So that's a third party that we engage with, who help us define how we should be approaching the situation. So in terms of external comms, again, external comms can be a very difficult line to meet, because too little comms and people feel like you haven't got control of the situation, too much comms and you might be giving the attackers additional information or other attackers information that they can then use to hit you again. And we've seen that actually happen in the real world, more in the private sector areas, but it's definitely been an issue. We're also seeing situations where third parties that we work with are attacked, and then they use that as a mechanism to get into our systems. So we have to respond to those very quickly as well. So making sure that we have good communications and honest communications with our third parties is vital. And again, we've had examples where we've had to react to that very quickly and ensure that our systems are maintained. So recover, and this is a difficult one, right? Because nobody wants to think that cyber attack's going to be effective, but the truth is we have to accept that these attacks will hit us. It's a matter of when, not if. So with that in mind, we ensure that we've got the best processes in place to ensure we can get the systems back up and running again. So we have robust business continuity plans, which ensure that services can continue to function in as best way that they can if their digital services aren't available. We also have disaster recovery. Now, disaster recovery is slightly different from business continuity. So business continuity is about what you do while your systems are down. Disaster recovery is about how you bring those systems back up again. And we regularly test our disaster recovery processes. So we pick various critical systems, we take them offline, we bring them back up from the backups and the support services. We have documents detailing how that's done, because you can imagine it can be quite a complicated process. And we've got an ongoing program that never ends, to be honest, where we just keep circling through our disaster recovery, checking those systems. And when we bring new systems online, we also make sure that we've got a disaster recovery plan for those. We've made a significant investment in data protection and our systems to make sure that if we do suffer from a cyber attack, we can bring them back quickly. And again, third-party support absolutely vital in this situation, because we don't have to deal with those sort of attacks, and there's so many different types of attacks. We rely on people who live that world all the time and can make sure that we operate in the most efficient and effective way possible. So that's recover. So what sort of threats do we face? And like I've mentioned, there's a number of different threats, and I'm just going to go through some of them and explain them in a little bit more detail. So ransomware. Ransomware tends to happen where attackers get into your system. Now that they can sit there for a while, like I've mentioned, or they can enact straight away. What they tend to do is either steal data or make sure that you can't actually access your data, or both, and then contact you and basically hold you to ransom. They'll offer to unencrypt your data for large sums of money, usually paid through Bitcoin, or they'll threaten to release sensitive information out into the wild. Now, this always used to be about money, but recently you start seeing more attackers just doing it either just for the fun of it, or to embarrass government agencies and put doubt in people's minds about how effective they are. So this is the one that you hear about most on the news, to be honest, and most of the examples I gave earlier on were impacted by malware. We don't just face I think there was always a perception of some teenage kid in a basement hacking away on their computer was behind most of these things. But now we more often than not face nation state interference, which is obviously has a lot of backing behind it, very well trained people. And again, a lot of it is focused at undermining our democracy, and especially around election time, we need to be very, very vigilant about that. And again, phishing emails are a prominent way that they set those attacks up. Third-party suppliers, so we're seeing more and more frequently that we're not attacked directly. They tend to attack our suppliers and then use them as a mechanism to get in. The Leicester City attack started in that way. It was a third party who was initially breached, and then they moved in through the connection there. So again, we have to make sure that we work very closely with the third parties and assess them for their readiness to meet the cyber threat. And of course, no IT presentation would be complete today without mentioning artificial intelligence. And as much as it's bandied around, it is a very real threat, not just from being able to create very convincing phishing emails, but also visually as well now. So even when you join a Teams meeting, they can mimic people's faces and voices, make you think that you're talking to somebody. So but on the flip side of that, of course, we can also use AI to help protect things. So that's an area that we're looking at. But it's very rapidly moving. And so, again, it's so important that we keep in touch with what's happening in the wider world. So what have we been doing over the last 12 months? So PSN compliance, I mentioned that earlier on. External party makes an assessment on our cyber readiness. That goes off to the Cabinet Office and they make recommendations and we enforce those. And by making sure that we're in the right position, we then get our accreditation, which we have at the moment. We're just in the process of making the submission so that we continue that on from that April date. We refreshed our information security e-learning package again to make sure that our staff feel very well informed about the impact of cybersecurity and the part they have to play in it. External auditing, internal auditing, we've had that. We also did a social engineering exercise where our third party generated phishing emails and sent them out to random people throughout the council to see what sort of response that we got back. About 80% of those mails we handled in the correct manner, but there was still 20% of people who responded back to the emails, giving out passwords and those kind of things. So it is an area that we've been tightening up upon. And again, I come back to the education part of the cybersecurity, which is so important. We've renewed the contract for our cyber security incident response partner. And again, I've mentioned how important that is, and keep regular testing the BC plans and the disaster recovery plans that goes on as well. Technology improvements. So we've replaced our data backup solution with a very robust tool that should help protect us from the malware that I talked about earlier on. Rollout of new antivirus tools, SIEM implementation, the phishing tool that I mentioned earlier on. We're also forcing reboots on laptops to make sure that the patches are installed on those systems. A lot of the time people were just putting their laptops to sleep day after day after day, and so the updates weren't being implemented on their laptop and leaving them insecure. So that's why we've put that in place. And then we also make sure that we monitor our smartphones, because it's not just about laptops and desktop. Any technical element can come under threat. And then the next 12 months, again, keeping that officer and member awareness up. We've got a 12-month comms plan to make sure that we tackle these things on a regular basis. Procurement templates, so we're updating our procurement templates to make sure that the cybersecurity element and the information governance element is up to date. Keep pushing on for the PSN, like I mentioned, and disaster recovery and BC plans, again, keep those up to date. And as I've got the opportunity, I'm just going to remind you all of what's good practice from personal level. So strong passwords, vital, very, very vital. We tend to suggest, and this is supported by the NCSC that I mentioned earlier on, 3 random words approach. So if you make your password too complicated, you're likely to forget it. Probably start writing it down. That's not great, or putting it in a spreadsheet somewhere. Again, not the best. So try and pick three random words. They can be any mix of anything, but it just tends to help keep that in mind. 2-factor authentication. So you're probably aware of this. This quite common in banking, etc., where you don't just have a password, you also have a device, usually a mobile phone, that when you try and log in, a code is sent to your phone. and you type that in, it means the attacker needs to have your phone and your login to be able to get that. We're currently making sure that our systems comply to that two-factor element as well. So there's a big project going on around that. Keeping your software up to date and devices up to date, so don't keep putting off that reboot or that please apply this patch. That's very, very important. And ensure that you have antivirus installed and it's up to date as well. Phishing emails, like I mentioned, people, if they can't technically get into your system, they'll try and get to you through yourself. Like I say, if you're not sure about the email, always report it to IT. We can always confirm whether it's valid or not. Yeah, and so you can use this advice at work and at home, and I recommend that you do both. So finally, and hopefully that wasn't too boring. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Matt. It's a very comprehensive report. I'm certainly glad I haven't got your job. Have we got any other questions? Kevin?
Yeah, thanks very much. But as having worked in IT for most of my life, but stopped about 10 years ago, I realise how much I've now don't know. Interesting. Just a simple question, really. When we first had the laptops, we used to have to change our passwords, I think every 90 days or something.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened now for several years.
Yeah. So that follows advice and guidance, actually, again, from the NCSA. And it's mainly because they found that people changing passwords, they forget them. And actually, it's more important about the complexity of the password, because what's happened is what they call brute force attacks, where and computing powers obviously expanded. So you can hire some compute power, just point it at a password, and you'll be able to break it. So it's not so much important about changing the password as it is ensuring that it's very difficult to break. So the security balance, and this again is an ever-evolving situation that we always have to keep an eye on. So what was advice, 2-3 years ago changes, and then we have to adapt and get that information out. But yeah, it's a very, very good question.
Thank you. Terry?
Thank you very much for the presentation. A large percentage of councils are now moving towards facial recognition on laptops. How near or far away are we?
So I've got it on my laptop. I'm not showing off, but I've got it on mine, right? We're in the program at the moment to deploy that out. So IT, we've got it all across IT and our digital areas, because they're probably the main focus of any attack. We've had conversations as well with Graham Wardle about members signing up for that as well. So in the next few months, you should definitely be seeing that facial recognition being deployed out to your laptops. Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually they're running a pilot now.
Yes. Yeah.
There was an email came out about, I don't know, a week ago, asking for volunteers to try a new facial recognition.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly very, very challenging. Have we got any other questions? Neil?
Sorry, do I have to expose my ignorance? But you're talking about reporting suspicious emails and report phishing. Is there an icon on the toolbar that enables you just to forward the email straight to IT?
Yeah. So in the Outlook program, when you open up an email, let me just see if I can get this up for you a second. You see it, yeah? Just in the top right-hand corner, next to reply with scheduling poll, there's a report phishing. Click on that, and that will instantly send that through to our.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I just needed my screen to be bigger.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else got no other queries? Well, thanks very much, Matt. Quite eye-opening presentation, and I mean, it's so very, very difficult with sort of national attacks and people working 24/7 throughout the world to try and get into these systems. It's just unbelievably difficult. So thanks for the presentation. Thanks for all you're doing. Yep. Really, really important.
No, and thank you for your time as well.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So moving back to the main report, Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the main report is reasonably short report this time, and basis of that is since at paragraph 5, I've explained that due to the short time elapsed since the December committee, we didn't do a detailed review of the registers in departments, but instead I gained written assurance from those risk owners that there hadn't been any significant changes or updates that were needed to be reported to the committee. There was only one, and that is in paragraph 7, and that relates to the Freeport risk, which had been debated for a while whether it was going to come off the register, and that was finally confirmed by the Chief Executive and the Monitoring Officer in that round. So what I wanted to do was just provide assurance to members that that was just a one-off to deal with that shortage of time, really, and we will revert to the regular practice of a more detailed review and challenge of registers for the March committee. So the rest of the paper really is given up to the conducting of the annual review and revision of 2 documents that support the framework, namely the risk management policy statement and strategy and the insurance policy. And a little bit like other reports today, some of the appendix is quite large. So to assist members in their review, what I've tried to do is identify key points in the documents. So at paragraph 12, you've got those for risk management, and at paragraph 13 for insurance. In both cases, though, the reference to the page numbers are the small numbers at the bottom of those pages in the appendix, not the pack page number. So if there's any questions, I can come back to those. Just to conclude on the report, really, finally, at paragraph 14, I've explained that both of those documents will be appended to the MTFS, and there's a recommendation at paragraph 15 for the committee to recommend that Cabinet approves the documents. So that's all I've got to say on the report, Chair.
Thank you, Neil. So, has any members got any questions or queries on this shortened report? No? Oh,
Chair.
yeah, Eric.
Fine, Right, it was only a silly little thing. It's page 279, and it's the table in page 279. And apologies if it's in Annex 3 and I've missed it. On the second column where we talk about corporate, you've got the Corporate Governance Committee, and then we've got the Corporate Risk Management Group. I've just wondered where the outputs from the Corporate Risk Management Group go.
So I chair that group in terms of my role of overseeing the framework. The outputs would go back really into any major changes in the risk management update papers, and they would come back to this committee. But then the other changes would be in terms of the policy and strategy which we're talking today. So once they review amongst that group, if there was any tweaks, then I would bring them out in that to draw their attention to you. So ultimately to come back through to the Corporate Governance Committee. It's a group of officers, but we do include, as well as what we call the risk champions in each department, we include others. So we've got insurance function, we may invite our broker along and things like that. So it's a range of specialisms effectively that form that group. But it will end up here.
Okay, so Bill.
Yeah, page 278. Questions there about climate change, etc. So there's 6 high-risk climate change things. 2 have been removed, leaving 4. What progress has been made on those? It says further on that due to staff shortages, etc., not be able to complete these. I thought they would have been important things we've got to completed. Climate change isn't going to wait for us, Chair, is it? You know, it's happening. Can't delay it.
So is the question on the penultimate paragraph which starts at 23-24 environmental performance report?
Yes.
Yeah. So, Mr. Bolter, I've taken this from the department in terms of their update of the risk. So, in terms of the 4 remaining one, where they where they're actually positioned at the moment, again, I'd have to come back to you, I think, with more detail.
Because at the meeting 2 days ago, that wasn't mentioned, as far as I remember. So that's why I brought it up now.
Was that a scrutiny
Yeah.
meeting? No, again, I wasn't party to that. So this has come from the section that deals with those risks. So I'll just have to feed back to your thinking.
So can we have something brought back to his chair on that?
Is that possible? Nick?
Yeah, on the where is it the position of the 4 remaining risks?
Yes.
Whether-
Yeah.
Yeah. Page 262. I don't know if I can find that again. Excuse me, Chair. It's been a long reporting session, this has. It mentions somewhere about the white paper. Yeah, would you like to enlarge on that at all?
Walter, top of page 262.
I can't remember. I think it's 266, item 12.
So second sentence relates to the government's English devolution white paper.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed your question on it.
I just wondered what effects that's going to have on us as a corporate governance committee, and why was it in this section? That was all.
That's easy.
I obviously think we've got to wait and see, don't we,
Yeah,
really, in terms of where it
I
goes.
wondered why it was in. That was all. Because we don't know about it, do we?
Terry.
I think we do know about it. I mean, it's been well travelled. So, yeah, effectively all councils will disappear.
Yeah.
New councils will be formed. There will be elections for shadow councillors where there's a reform unitaries in whatever format that comes out. And then that shadow council will actually determine the constitution, the committees, how it's going to work, and start putting nuts and bolts together. So, I mean, that's what's happened everywhere in the country. This has happened so far. So I don't envisage it will be any different here. But obviously, this council, which is what you're concerned about, will carry on with all its duties, including corporate governance, until such times as a shadow authority or more than one shadow authority takes over the duties of this council.
Yeah.
As you say, we await with interest the Secretary of State's letter, which may be today or maybe next week.
Yeah.
Depending on which rumour you believe.
Yeah, I think we all await that with interest. Simone.
I was just going to add that clearly the white paper represents a potentially significant change for the council, potentially the biggest change that we've seen for many, many years. And for that reason, we thought it was right to flag that up as a potential future risk. There'll be risks and opportunities, but there'll be things I'm sure that the committee will want to manage and have oversight on over the next few months.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. So, any other questions or queries? No? So, moving to the recommendations on page 263 of the agenda pack. Regarding recommendation A, the committee is asked to note the current status of the corporate risk register facing the county council. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Kevin. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Regarding recommendation B, we are asked to make recommendations on an area which may benefit from further examination. Well, we've had the risk, the cyber security risk, but what thought it would be worthwhile examining, having a presentation on is business continuity. Should a cyber attack be successful and shut down our systems, what are our plans for business continuity? Neil, is that acceptable to you?
Yes, Joe. I mean, we just saw it as an actual fit following today's presentation, and I did notice there was reference to the business continuity plans in Matt's presentation. So it's just that issue that if it happens, especially amongst our critical services, how are they going to keep on going?
Yeah, I think that's very sensible.
Well, I would only raise the comment, Mr. Chairman, made by it was Matt, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
obviously about, I suppose, my concern about debating something like continuity in public. Well, is that something that, you know, we could do at an appropriate level, that it wouldn't potentially harm this council if anyone who knows more about such things than I do was listening in?
I think, like Matt's presentation, it would have to be fairly generic in terms of what we were saying out there. We wouldn't want to lay any cards on the table in terms of a public domain, really.
Yeah, it's a valid point, but yeah, I think it would have to be very generic, and it's just a reassurance to members that we have got systems in place to pick it up.
It would be more about the process,
Yeah,
and the sort of governance over those processes,
Yeah.
than the actual what we do next.
yeah. It's remarkable, really. I just can't believe how much effort goes into trying to hack these systems. Literally, throughout the day, throughout the year, there is people in various places working on trying to get into the systems. It's just remarkable. But so that's what we'll have on that. And with regard to recommendation C, can we take the updates on the risk management policy statement and the strategy and the insurance policy as being duly noted? Is everybody happy with that? Thank you. So on to item 11. Changes to the contract procedure rules following the implementation of the Procurement Act. We've got welcome Kay Springthorpe, head of the Procurement and Supply Chain Management, who's going to introduce this item. So over to you, Kay.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So when the UK left the European Union in 2020, the government wanted to create a simpler, more flexible commercial system that better meets the needs of us as a country, but remaining compliant with our international obligations. That resulted in the development of the Procurement Act 2023. The Procurement Act comes into force on the 24th of February this year, and it replaces the previous Public Contract Regulations 2015. Our current contract procedure rules that we operate on as a council, which are Part 4G of our constitution, were developed for adhering to those Public Contract Regulations 2015. So what I'm bringing to you today for approval is a set of contract procedure rules that mirror the requirements of the Procurement Act. The contract procedure rules essentially explain standards and procedures that the council is expecting to be applied by all staff responsible for buying goods, services or works on behalf of the council. Everything that we procure up to the 24th of February will remain under the Public Contract Regulations rules, and everything that we procure from the 24th of February onwards will be under the Procurement Act. So for a period of time until all of the contracts that we've awarded up to the 24th of February expire, we will be operating under two sets of rules. So yeah, basically what I'm asking today is that you recommend the new rules.
Yep. Okay, so that makes absolute sense to me. We're going to comply with the new contract procurement rules after the 24th of February. Apply the old rules for any contracts before then until they run off. Has anybody got any queries or questions for Kay? No, very clear. Terry.
On one page.
Yeah. So the requirements under the Act are that we publish those below threshold contracts. We do actually, as a matter of course, as part of the rules, quite tightly monitor most of our spend from 25,000 upwards. So there are approval limits in place for everything that we procure as a council from £5,000 upwards, we have what we call a procurement initiation document, which is essentially the approval to go ahead and procure. So we'll be able to use those documents to publish the necessary notices. It is an extra administrative burden on us as a council, but I think if you read through all of the rules, there is quite a lot of additional administrative burden, and it's something that councils across the country are recognising, and that we are going to have to do something as we progress into these rules around our structures and processes to make sure that we're not only meeting those additional burdens, but effectively operating as a council.
Thank you.
It's possible to overcomplicate EU.
Kevin, yeah.
I mean, presumably this level, as time goes by, another 10 years, it might be modified, bearing in mind inflation and so on. But I mean, bear in mind, I'm only a lowly little parish council chairman, for example. We have just the same things in our financial regulations. Obviously not this high, but we have to publish everything anything we spend over £500.
We do have to publish spend as well.
Yeah.
This is more about our procurement activity.
That's all right.
Transparency.
It's be done. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I concur with what you're saying, Kevin. It's a pain, but it has to be done. So if we have
delay grant Thornton even more.
Yes, yeah. So we now we are asked to recommend that the County Council approves the new contract procedure rules attached to the report and authorises the Director of Corporate Resources in consultation with the Director of Law and Governance to approve any minor amendments up to the rules up to the 24th of February. I'd have to recommend to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Derek. All those in favour? Thank you. So, on to the whistleblowing report. We've got with us Lauren Howson, Director of Law and Governance, who's going to present this report. So over to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. A short report, hopefully self-explanatory. We've brought the report today to comply with SIPFA guidance, which recommends there be an annual review of the whistleblowing policy and its effectiveness, and to confirm to members that we reviewed the policy last year over the summer with colleagues from internal audit and HR, and updated the policy, consulted with the recognised trade unions, and the revised policy is as attached to your paper and obviously published on the Council's intranet. The SIPFA guidance is that the outcome of the review is reported to the committee. No expectation around individual cases, as you might expect, as they're largely sort of confidential and contain a lot of personal information. But for members' awareness, I've included a brief overview just to give a flavour really of the summary of referrals at page 361 and the outcomes. And I'm asking that the committee note the report and the intention to report on whistleblowing in this way on an annual basis as part of this committee's annual reporting cycle. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so over to committee. It's a very straightforward report. Has anybody got any queries or comments? No? Yeah. Okay, so we're asked to note the report and the proposed annual reporting cycle on the effectiveness of the policy. I'm happy to move this. Can I have a second? Thank you. All those in favour? Yeah, that's unanimous. So we move on to the final item, which is the consultation on strengthening the standards and conduct framework for local authorities in England. So, Lauren, again, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, I just want to draw the committee's attention to this open consultation on strengthening standards issued by MHCLG. And the consultation is open until the end of February. And the paper seeks members' views and approval of the proposed response on behalf of the Council. Alongside that, to note that members are, or may wish to do so, complete this consultation in their own right. And I think the link has been sent to all members via the Democracy account before Christmas. So there's an opportunity to respond in two ways, a sort of a collective as a Council response and an individual response if members prefer. The aim of the consultation is set out in paragraph 6 of the report and refers to achieving an appropriate and proportionate means of dealing with misconduct effectively when it occurs. Members will be aware from reports I've brought to this committee before that there's a low level of member conduct complaints at the council, which is obviously very pleasing. But it's important at the same time that we do have an effective way of dealing with those issues on the rare occasions when they do arise. So at page 374, in a sort of tabular form, are the questions that are asked as part of the consultation. The middle column is the sort of MHCLG available response, and on the right-hand column, I have put in a suggested response, but obviously that's the purpose of bringing this to the committee today, to seek comments on the suggested response. It's simply a starting point for members. I think the main points I draw out of the consultation are the sort of more significant elements. So that includes a reintroduction of a power to suspend for serious breaches vested in the Standards Committee. And you'll see I've suggested that the council supports that. Should the power of suspension have a maximum time limit? A suggested time limit is 6 months. Should the Standards Committee have the power to withhold allowances from suspended members and or ban members from premises? And should there be a power to suspend on an interim basis? I've suggested yes to that question, but a bit like an employment suspension for a member of staff, that's seen as a neutral act. And then the same questions for interim suspension as apply for non-interim suspensions around allowances and access to the building and facilities. A question then about whether members there should be an opportunity for disqualification if members are suspended more than once. I've suggested that the answer to that would be no. My thinking for that was that it was a sort of subverting a democratic process, really. But obviously, you know, members' views are welcome. Whether there should be immediate disqualification for gross misconduct, and for the same reasons, I've suggested no to that question. Then some questions about whether there should be appeal rights. I've suggested yes to that, and that should be to an internal appeal panel. I think those are the more significant points that because they represent a significant change, I guess, from the current practice. I open it up to members really to just feedback anything they would wish to add or change to that proposed response. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, it seems not unreasonable. I very much hope that they wouldn't have to use this except in the most exceptional circumstances where there's been a clear and fairly serious breach of the Code of Conduct. Bill?
Yes, that's the very point, isn't it? What is a serious breach of the Code of Conduct? This gives lawyers a real open game, doesn't it? Because one say one and one say another. So what is serious? It should be defined what it meant by serious. May be difficult, but as you do that, we could argue all day about what is not or is serious. You know,
I think
so. Perhaps Lauren would like to answer that.
I think that would be probably it's very, you know, it's so difficult because there's so many different ways
it
you
would
can
boil
have.
down to case law at the end of the day.
Yeah.
What I think would happen in practice is that there would be guidance issued with the code, and as there is with the current code, which sets out examples of the type of conduct that would be regarded as serious. And you probably would liken it to the gross misconduct in the employment world, which isn't defined exactly, but everybody kind of knows what it is. So examples that you would think about as physical violence towards another person, theft, those sorts of issues, they're clearly in that really serious category, whereas the sort of political discourse that gets a little bit heated probably wouldn't be. So I expect there would be guidance on that, but I don't think we'll ever get to a sort of cut and dried list of what is and what isn't. I think it would be for assessment by the Standards Committee, with advice and with the guidance issued by the probably by the LGA, I guess, to accompany the code when it is, you know, if it is changed in due course. No, it's really early stage. It's just at the consultation stage now.
So Bill, I take your point. We will get some guidance on it, but I think it'll be fairly clear when most people realise when they've done something incredibly bad and silly. Terry, did you?
Thanks, Chairman. I mean, the backdrop to this is that this consultation was announced by the Deputy Prime Minister at the LGA conference at Harrogate back in October, primarily around the Debate Not Hate campaign, amongst other things. And therefore, I think it will probably go further than we might expect it to go in terms of what constitutes breaches, particularly in terms of what is considered hate speech, particularly when it's published online. And therefore, whilst I don't have any real issues with the responses we made, what I think we probably need to start doing as a committee is comparing this against what we currently have, because I'm not sure what we currently have, what the instructions would be to us to how we form a committee, how we deal with it, etc. What we can do, because I suspect that the number of cases will increase anyway. They are already increasing incrementally at second and third tier council level. And bear in mind, obviously, what we just talked about with the white paper, that it is likely in the not too distant future there will be a replacement of the current system by unitary authorities who will then pick up all of the cases. I just wonder if it might be practical to start doing some additional work on this and perhaps look at where we are. I mean, I, for one, I know we say no, and now my personal preferences, I think we're probably at the stage where we should consider having a standards committee put in place rather than it being a sub-function of this committee, because I'm not sure this committee has sufficient members anyway to form a panel to hear it and then to hear the appeal. And it's a question of where do we then get those appeal people from. So whilst I think in its essence there's no real problem with the response we're making, I mean, I raised one question, as Lauren will recall yesterday from our chair's thing about, it would be sensible that if somebody from this committee, for instance, were found in breach of standards, you wouldn't want them to carry on sitting on this committee if we were then the standards committee as well. That would just be insane to do. Now, I appreciate that's outside the scope of this return, but I just think I just wonder if, while we've got time, and it will be useful work for whatever replaces us in due course, that we've started to put the bones together for something which is workable and practical going forward, utilising the experience we currently have.
Laura, have you got a comment on that?
Just come back on that point. We do have approved by this committee, I think it was last looked at in about 2023, a process for dealing with member conduct complaints. So it sets out very clearly, each stage of the process, what should happen. It doesn't address, I think, the point that you raise around the appointment of the panel. And what happens in that case, we've got a pool of panel members, and they're selected on a sort of politically balanced basis by colleagues in democratic services, I think in consultation with the whips, but I'm not exactly sure. We would need to, if we do end up with an appeal panel and a standards committee and an appeal committee from that, we would probably do something like we do for HR type appeals and have two separate sort of processes. So I think the point you make is right. We have to make sure we've got enough people who are not prejudiced for some other reason from sitting. But certainly, so that's something that will need to be looked at because it's different. It's different to how we do things at the moment.
Thanks very much for that, Lauren. The last time I looked into this at a different level than here, it was a requirement. I can't remember where from, that for a standards and then the appeals committee at the very minimum, the chairman and vice chairman should be appointed and then other members taken from a pool. And therefore, I don't know if we've got those. I couldn't find the link. So it's probably my fault for missing it, but I don't know if we've actually nominated who the chairman of the standards panel should be, which is probably the chairman for this. But then have we nominated who will be the chairman of the appeals committee, because they cannot be the same? And I think that's a requirement as well.
Well, there's no requirement for appeals at the moment. We simply don't have arrangements for that. So that's not in place. We haven't got a standing chairman here. That's not a legal requirement. It might be practice elsewhere, but it's not a legal requirement. So what happens here is the panel is appointed and the panel elects the chairman from within its membership on the day.
Okay, so in summary, Terry, you're suggesting that there is a separate standards committee.
I think it needs to be looked into. We can't go by my personal view. What I was suggesting, I think, was that this is fine. I just wonder if we need to start a piece of work over the coming months to look at how this might dovetail in with where we might need to go in terms of our own internal arrangements, which could then be passed to a unitary authority or whoever takes over in due course from what we're doing. But I do suspect that the government are quite keen on this, and I suspect their rules, when they are published, might actually lead to an increase in incidences of where people could be reported to a standards committee over and above what we see now.
Yep. Oh, Lauren, were you happy to do that, to have a look at it?
Yes.
So once we get the responses back on where we're going.
I think what will happen now is it's got to be submitted by the 26th of February. Then we'll follow a sort of gap really whilst it's considered, and I expect there'll be something popped out later on this year as to what's going to happen next. But just in turn, and I'm very happy to pick up the work that Mr. Richardson's referred to. But can I just be clear? The question is in the consultation, should all principal authorities be required to form a standards committee? I have said no, the local authority should be free to decide whether a standalone committee is necessary. But I'm picking up, I think the preference is to say yes, just a simple yes to that rather than a discretion.
I personally like the response you did. I think it should be up to each authority to decide whether they have a separate standards committee or not. But that's my point.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Lauren, for the report. I think it is commonly agreed amongst members that the existing regime and sanctions on code of conduct doesn't go far enough. So I welcome the consultation to strengthen the standards and the proposed sanctions. I have already completed an LGA survey in respect of the consultation. One of the questions on the LGA survey was whether or not a member felt that one of the sanctions should be reporting the finding, if it is a finding that a breach has occurred, should go on the member's register. And I note that the departmental survey doesn't really cover that. Do we have scope to add that if we felt that that was an appropriate response, that the finding of a breach should go on the member's register for a period of time to be determined by the local authority? Second point is in relation to your comments concerning the repeated disqualifications, and I entirely respect your decision that it should not usurp the local democratic process of the election. But I wonder, having a look at what Parliament does it through its standards committee, they recommend a suspension for so many days, and if it goes over that period, which I think is 10 days, that may well trigger a recall petition. And rather than an automatic removal of office, I wonder whether or not, if there is such an egregious position where a member is repeatedly being disqualified, that it would actually trigger a recall petition, and then it would be up to the local residents in that particular division to trigger an election. And if that member wanted to stand again, an answer for his or her actions, then so be it. Is that something that might be able to be considered in this response?
There is there's an opportunity to put in free text. So any comments like that, we can feed in if that's the committee's wish.
Seems reasonable. And so really reverting to the other thing, do you think we ought to say that yes, we do want a standards committee, or no, we leave it up to the local authority to decide whether they want to have a separate standards committee or what? Are there any strong feelings, or are you happy with the response as it is? No? You're happy? Yeah. You're happy? Are you happy with it, John, the response as it is now? Okay. So there is the opportunity for the council to have a standards committee. And I think, to be honest, a lot of this will evolve when we see what comes back and where we're going. And I think the points you've made, Neil, are very valid. We can't just keep going round and round in a circle with repeated breaches, deliberate and repeated breaches at a serious level, and just sort of knocking it down the road. I think it's a good point. So with that in mind, we are asked to approve the responses with the amendments that we've suggested through Neil. The other responses are kept as they are. I'm happy to move the proposed response. Can I have a second? Yeah, thanks. All those in favour? Yeah, that's it. So, date of the next meeting is Monday, the 31st of March 2025 at 10 a.m. There are no urgent items. So, thank you all for your input and attending this morning's meeting. And we've covered quite a lot of ground. And the training session before was worthwhile. So, the meeting is now closed, and thank you.
Thank you.